aren't sure if his corporal was as literal as he said. I'm like, he was a freaking emperor. These women are going to say anything that he wants to hear because he's the freaking emperor and he has the power to kill them.
Yeah.
Or make their life wonderful. So, at this point, his wife Marie had already taken a lover and had no intention of joining him in this island. She's like, you go ahead, I'm staying here with my new man.
Yeah.
And she was
a little bigger than yours.
Right. And France was also refusing to pay him his allowance of 2 million. Right? So they're like, we're not paying you that. Like, you made that deal, but we're not gonna honor that. Like, why should we pay you money for getting us in this place? So in March of 1815, he had enough. So he returned to France and started to rally troops again. So he has his 400 volunteers, right? So he goes to the mainland and he finds like the army basically, and he's like, oh, you guys remember how much you loved me? You still love me, right? Come on, let's take France back. It's like, okay. So he took his new army to Belgium and defeated the Prussians in June of 1815. So he's like used to being busy. So he's at this island, can't do anything or go anywhere, and he's like, I'm done. Let's go. They're not giving me my money. My wife isn't here. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna raise some hell because this is what he's like, keeping his little body busy,
Yeah, and like that's his whole life has been in war. He doesn't know anything else.
Right. It was very short-lived because 2 days later, he encountered the British under the control of Wellington. He was leading the troops, and we all heard of Wellington. And this was at Waterloo, where he was defeated for his final time. So he gets all excited. He goes to the mainland. He gets his army. He defeats the Prussians. And then 2 days later, he gets defeated by the British. Like, oh, sorry.
Crushes little spirit.
Right. He was eventually exiled to the island of St. Helena in the southern Atlantic. And this was not his choice. This was where the British sent him. He was not sent with 400 of his own men. His life there was monotonous. He was under, like, there was a British governor at St. Helena, and he was under, like, Napoleon was under his control. Napoleon had free roam of the house, but if he wanted to go outside, he had to go outside with a British guard. And he didn't like that, and because Napoleon complex came from something, he decided that I'm just not going to go outside then. I'm not going to have to rely on you. I'll just stay in my room. So he confined himself to his mold-infested house.
Oh, good.
We talked in a Terrible Trends episode because they like the color green, and the green was made with arsenic. So this mold-infested house with arsenic green walls, because he refused to be escorted everywhere by British captors. He's like, no, and I'm going to show you. It's like, no, you're not. It's like when your kids throw a fit. It's like, you're only punishing yourself, honey.
Yeah.
Like, have your little toddler tantrum. And his life was so monotonous. He was really lonely. His wife wasn't there. His health had started to deteriorate. By the end of 1817, he was really in bad health. He had a lot of stomach problems, a lot of pain. And his doctor, they were treating him. They said he was really sick. He'd lost a lot of weight. And the governor said, oh, it's just anemia. He'll be fine. He wasn't fine. His doctor... No. At the time, he had a few doctors because he was not an easy person to live with. Obviously, he used to be an emperor. He has a little corporal, all that. His doctor was named Barry O'Meara, said he needed to change his living conditions, but the governor said no, he just has anemia. He's going to be fine. And then this doctor was replaced by John Stokoe, who said the same thing. His health is because of his living conditions, and eventually he got replaced too by a Corsican doctor by the name of Francesco Antamarchi, which is fun to say.
Yes, it is.
And then by February of 1821, I think Napoleon's 51 at this point. His health was deteriorating rapidly. By March, he was bedridden, and at this point, Napoleon dictated his will. He wrote his own death announcement and left the date blank because he's an emperor. He's used to controlling everything. So
he even has to do his own death announcement.
He's like, nope, this is how it's gonna. This is what it's gonna say. He said he wished for his ashes or his remains to be buried in the banks of the River Seine in France. And in the midst of the and his words were, in the midst of the French people whom I have loved so well, which he did. His people, right. He was for the little people, the poor people.
Because he was little.
Yes. But Sir Hudson Lowe, the governor of the island, buried him on the island. He said, I don't have to do what you say. Oh. You're nobody, you little man. You're just going to get buried in the willow grove down there. So that's what happened. Oh. He died May 5th of 1821 at the age of 51. So, I mean, he started by February, he was bedridden, and then by May, he was dead. And his last words were, and obviously they were spoken in France, and I can't speak French, so I'm going to say what the English counterparts were. France, the army, head of the army, Josephine, and then he died.
Oh.
Those are his last words. They did conduct an autopsy. This was his doctor, Francesco Antamarchi, and he was found to have had a stomach ulcer big enough to put your pinky in.
Ew.
Yeah. And it seemed to be, his stomach also seemed to be filled with, like, cancerous lesions. Which they said, ulcers.
His father died of cancer.
Right. You know, and he was living in a house, he was basically living in a moldy house full of arsenic. Which, those wallpapers and the paints, once they got wet and mold, that's when the fumes would come out and that would make him sick. During his autopsy, this doctor removed his heart and his viscera, which would be his stomach and intestines, and they were preserved in separate silver jars filled with spirits. And they think that he eventually wanted to send these to his wife, the heart to his wife, and the intestines to study to some doctor, I think. But because he ended up staying on the island, the governor just had them placed inside his coffin at his feet. But there were other parts of Napoleon that also disappeared during his autopsy. Yeah. They said that he was dressed in his favorite battle uniform and was placed in 4 nested coffins, along with his viscera at his feet, and some of his good silverware, which is weird.
Weird.
Yeah. And each coffin was soldered shut. So, like, they put him in one coffin and they soldered it shut. And then they did this with the 4 coffins that he was laid in, and they didn't know if they did that so that it would deter people getting at him, you know, because he was like a notorious famous Frenchman, and the French people loved him, and they didn't want people trying to come and get a piece of him, although the doctor already did that. His cause of death has never been agreed upon. So stomach ulcer was the official cause given by his physician, but it could have been stomach cancer.
Right.
Some people think he was poisoned with arsenic on purpose, or was the green wallpaper poisoning? Right. You know, and when his coffin and remains were eventually moved to France in 1840, which this was 2 decades later, they said his corpse was very well preserved and not decomposed. And that's because, like, arsenic is a preservative. And, like, even, I think we talked about Charles Dickens's Crow when we did the Edgar Allan Poe episode. Yes. And he preserved that with arsenic. So, like, that was a way, like, taxidermists would do it. So the fact that his body still looked really good 2 decades later could have been because he was full of arsenic, which is totally...
That's crazy.
And now to get to the bones or bone of the episode, intended. It was said that the good Dr. Antamarchi was not treated well by Napoleon. Napoleon was kind of mean to everybody that was under him.
Yeah.
That worked directly under him or worked for him. And that as some sort of revenge, the doctor took Napoleon's most prized part as a sick souvenir.
Oh my God.
Yes. It is known that his penis, Napoleon's penis, made its first post-mortem appearance.
Good Lord.
In the possession of Napoleon's priest from Corsica.
What?
This man's name was Father Ange Paul Vignali. And it seems an odd souvenir for a priest. Or maybe.
Yeah. Or, you know, he might like it.
But the good father, he had a lot of Napoleon's things. Like, he had quite a few mementos from Napoleon. He had some of his personal effects from his home in Corsica, a copy of his will, some of his waistcoats, some of his hair, a pair of his breeches. What are you doing with those breeches, buddy?
And his pee-pee.
Yes. And making up, these were all, and his penis is all made up the Vignali collection.
Wow.
Yes. This priest died 7 years after leaving St. Helena from a blood feud. And that's all I could find about it. That's all it said. It's like he died from a blood feud. Yeah. So it's like, okay, that makes no sense to me.
Maybe a family feud.
Something. Yeah. This collection stayed in his family until 1916. They had it and it was on display.
His penis.
You could go, yes. You could go and take a gander at it. His pee-pee.
Now wait. How is the pee-pee still looking like a pee-pee?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Because it didn't really.
Oh God, this is terrible.
It was in 1916. It was then auctioned in London, and the auctioneers described Napoleon's penis as a mummified tendon.
Ew.
Yes. The collection.
Oh God.
The collection was purchased by an anonymous buyer. They did not.
I wouldn't tell them who I was either.
Right. And the collection immediately went to Maggs Brothers, and this is a London antiquarian bookseller, and it was in London. So, like, he ended up, he died with it in St. Helena, and then it made its way to Corsica to this priest's collection. I don't know if it's in the church. Probably. You could go to church and see Napoleon's penis, because that's what you go to church for. And it was mummified, but I think at first it might have been pickled in spirits, and then they dried it out like jerky.
It's like a dried up old pickle.
Yeah.
Like when you take it out and you just let it sit on the counter for a long time and get all dry and leathery.
Or maybe they put it in a jar of salt and made it like a mummy. Dehydrated it all up. It was on sale at this bookstore, and it sold in 1924 to a Philadelphian by the name of Abraham Simon Wolfe Rosenbach. So from London, it went to Philadelphia.
Wow.
And he allowed the Museum of French Art in New York City to display the penis. So, yes, it went from Philadelphia to New York City. And it was reported from Time Magazine, described it as a maltreated strip of leather shoelace. Or they said it also looked like a shriveled eel. In quotation marks, a maltreated strip of leather shoelace. Poor Nappy and his maltreated shoelace of a penis. See, all the boring was worth it just for that line.
It's like every time someone says Napoleon complex, I'm gonna think about his shriveled up little shoelace penis.
Yep. Rosenbach sold the collection in 1944, where it was passed around. Until about
passing it around now.
Yep, it was until 1977, and then
the year of my birth.
Yes, and of Napoleon's final penis sale.
Oh, me and Napoleon.
Yes, it was the final year of his sale. In 1977, it went for sale in Paris. Back to Paris.
Oh, he's back to Paris now.
Yes. Most of his collection, it was a whole collection. So it wasn't just his penis. It was like the penis and the whole collection that the priest had in Corsica. Right. And most of the collection ended up with Napoleon's remains at Les Invalides, which is where his body is interred, except for the part of his body. Everything else that was his are there, except for actually the part that was part of his body is not buried with him. Yeah, it's not there. The French government will not acknowledge that the, in quotation marks, tendon as genuine. It's not his penis. It's not his peen. Nope, it's not. That is not Napoleon's penis. Okay. And it was purchased by a New Jersey urologist by the name of John Latimer. And this is a guy who bought it because he's a urologist.
Yeah.
He deals with peens
Yes.
every day.
Fantastic.
Right?
Yes.
Yes. He actually passed away in 2007. But so Napoleon's penis is now in New Jersey, and this urologist, he liked to collect things too, not